My name is Ashley Parker. I'm 33, and I've spent the last 9 years becoming someone my family never really bothered to understand. The heavy glass doors of the Manhattan courthouse swung shut behind me, sealing out the August humidity and the noise of the city. Suddenly, everything was too quiet, except for the click of my heels echoing off marble floors as I walked into the main hall, where every eye seemed to turn my way. On the defendant's side of the courtroom sat my younger brother, Brian Parker. It was so surreal, seeing him there, stripped of his usual air of invincibility. Even his once perfect hair was flattened with sweat, and the expensive suit he wore looked crumpled from a night spent in a holding cell instead of a luxury condo. His attorney, a sharp-eyed man in a navy suit, leaned in, whispering urgently. Brian's jaw clenched. He didn't look up. Maybe he couldn't. Behind him, our parents sat together on the hard wooden benches, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. To anyone else, they might look like a model American family, Mom in a tailored blue dress, Dad in a grey suit he'd probably worn to every job interview since the 80s. But to me, they looked small and scared, like people who'd just realized the house they'd spent decades building was full of cracks. They hadn't called me when Brian was arrested. Not when the federal charges hit the news, not when agents had shown up at their front door with search warrants, not when it became clear his tech company was under a microscope for something way bigger than bad accounting. Only 3 days ago did I get a voicemail from my mother, and even that was by accident, a message she left while talking to my father in the background. Ashley still owes us that much, as she'd said, voice sharp with disappointment. She may be a letdown, but she's family. Disappointment. The word followed me everywhere. It lived in the spaces between my parents' words at Thanksgiving, in the forced politeness of their Christmas calls, in the look on their faces when I'd come home in a blue NYPD patrol uniform instead of the law school blazer they dreamed about. It was the last thing my father had called me when I left for the academy. If you're happy being the shame of the Parker name, then go ahead. I had. And I'd stopped answering their calls. Yet now, walking down the aisle of this federal courthouse in the heart of New York City, I could almost feel their confusion burning into my back. Mom's eyes followed every step, taking in the pressed shirt, the neat bun, the quiet confidence I wore like a shield. It was the same calm she'd mistaken for defiance as a kid, the same independence she'd resented when I chose a career in law enforcement instead of law. People in expensive suits and crisp uniforms nodded to me as I passed. I caught glimpses of recognition, other officers I'd worked with, a federal agent I'd once partnered with on a cybercrime task force, even a city council member I'd given testimony for in another courtroom. All of them gave me those subtle, knowing nods that say, "You belong here." I wondered if my parents noticed. The prosecutor today was Jessica Walsh, a no-nonsense assistant U.S. attorney I'd worked cases with before. She stood near the judge's bench, reviewing notes, occasionally looking up to catch my eye. She'd been the one to ask me to testify, to step into the light and tell the truth about my own brother. We'd gone over my statement again and again, making sure every word was clear, every fact supported by evidence, nothing to give the defense an easy out. Because Brian's case wasn't just about fraud or a few missing dollars. This was about selling privileged information, city contracts, tech secrets, the kind of data that could change lives or ruin them. He'd been trusted with municipal cybersecurity systems, and someone, somewhere, had paid him to leak details to people who should never have had access. When the charges dropped, it was all over the news, a rising tech star accused of corporate espionage. Our family name in headlines. Our parents' golden boy in handcuffs. I remembered every moment, every step that had brought me here, late-night calls with Jessica. Surveillance footage reviewed until my eyes ached, my own badge on the table as I told my superiors that yes, I knew the suspect personally. That he was my brother. That's why I was here today. Because the truth mattered more than loyalty, more than the illusion my parents clung to, more than the comfort of silence. When the bailiff called for the court to rise, the judge entered, a man in his 60s with steely grey hair and a reputation for being unflinching. His gavel sounded like a thunderclap. Suddenly, it didn't matter that I was a Parker. It didn't matter that my family sat just behind me, or that my own brother's freedom might hinge on what I said next. All that mattered was the truth. And for the first time in years, as the judge looked over the courtroom and called for opening statements, I realized I wasn't scared. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if my family couldn't see it. As the first witness took the stand, my father, the courtroom felt heavy with tension. He was always a reserved man, never one to show emotion in public, but today his voice trembled as he spoke. He described Brian as a brilliant mind, a visionary who could have changed the world if only given the right support. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering prayers under her breath, looking like someone had knocked the air out of her. The judge listened, nodding politely, as my father painted a picture of Brian as a misunderstood genius, a victim of circumstance. The narrative was familiar. All my life, my brother had been the golden boy. He was the child who won every science fair, who graduated from Stanford before he could legally rent a car, who made Forbes a 30 under 30 year and still found time to fly home for Christmas. He'd been the pride of the Parker name, until the morning federal agents knocked on his penthouse door. My own successes never seemed to register. When I made sergeant, they called it a nice start. When I worked double shifts or got citations for bravery, it was a dangerous work, but surely you'll go to law school eventually. Even as I moved into the economic crimes unit, solving cases most people only read about in the business section, I could see the confusion in my mother's eyes. It wasn't the life they'd planned for me. Growing up, disappointment wasn't just a word, it was a shadow that lived at our dinner table, haunting my every move. It followed me through school, through awkward family holidays, through every milestone that was never quite enough. If only you were more like Brian. They said it so often it became a mantra. I remember the day I made my decision. I'd been accepted to 3 law schools, but something in me rebelled at the idea of spending more years chasing a dream that was never mine. I wanted to make a difference, but I wanted to do it my way. I walked into the NYPD recruiting office on a rainy Thursday and never looked back. My father said I was throwing my life away. My mother cried for a week. Brian, always charming, joked that at least I'd be the first in the family to get a gun. I didn't speak to any of them for months after graduation. In the academy, I found my place among people who judged me by my actions, not my pedigree. I learned how to read a room, how to hold my own in a crowd of doubters, how to carry the weight of a badge and a name that meant nothing on the street. Every day I put on the uniform, I felt more myself. But my parents never stopped hoping I'd change my mind. Their calls grew less frequent, their invitations to family gatherings more formal, more awkward. When Brian started his company, the gulf widened. My successes were ignored, his were celebrated at every turn. He was their future, I was their what might have been. Sitting in the courtroom now, watching my father defend Brian, I felt the old sting of resentment. I also felt a strange sense of relief. This was their reckoning, not mine. They had built Brian into an idol, and now, faced with the reality of his choices, they were desperate to rewrite the narrative. But facts are stubborn things. As witness after witness testified, college friends, business partners, even a neighbor who'd known Brian since grade school, I listened to stories of generosity and ambition, of charity donations and long hours building something from nothing. Each one, I knew, contained just a sliver of the truth. The real story was buried beneath layers of image and expectation. Finally, the judge looked up from his notes. Does the prosecution wish to present any character witnesses? Jessica Walsh stood. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Officer Ashley Parker. The silence that followed was almost physical. I stood, my uniform pressed and immaculate, and walked to the witness box. For a moment, every face in the room blurred except one, my mother's. She looked at me, searching for some sign that I was still the little girl she remembered. I kept my gaze steady. I raised my right hand and took the oath, my voice clear and steady. This was not the moment my family would have chosen for me, but it was the moment I chose for myself. Please state your name and occupation for the record, Jessica began. Ashley Parker. I'm a sergeant with the NYPD, assigned to the Economic Crimes Unit. A ripple of surprise passed through the gallery. My father's face froze. My mother gasped. Brian stared as if he was seeing me for the first time. How long have you been with the department, Sergeant Parker? 9 years. I joined after college and worked my way up from patrol. And what is your current role in this investigation? I was the lead investigator on the task force examining fraudulent activity in municipal cybersecurity contracts, specifically those awarded to Parker Solutions, my brother's company. For the next 20 minutes, Jessica led me through a careful dance between classified and unclassified information. I explained the investigation, how suspicious transactions had triggered a red flag, how city systems were compromised, and how, after months of work, the evidence pointed back to Brian. But inside, beneath the composure and the police jargon, I was still just a daughter trying to make sense of a family that had never truly seen me. Sitting in the witness box, under the harsh lights of the Manhattan courtroom, I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. Some people watched with open curiosity, others with suspicion or silent judgment. But I kept my focus on Jessica Walsh, the prosecutor. She nodded, a subtle reassurance, before starting with her questions. Sergeant Parker, can you explain how you became involved in the investigation into Parker Solutions? I nodded. Of course. The NYPD's Economic Crimes Unit was alerted to irregularities in several city technology contracts about a year ago. These contracts were part of a public-private partnership aimed at upgrading the city's cybersecurity infrastructure. My team specializes in white-collar crime, so the task force was assigned to investigate. Jessica's tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. And when did you realize your brother, Brian Parker, was a person of interest? A muscle in my jaw tensed, but I answered evenly. About 6 months into the investigation, evidence began to surface suggesting that someone inside Parker Solutions was sharing confidential information with unauthorized third parties. Financial records and email intercepts eventually led us to Brian. The judge interjected, Sergeant Parker, are you comfortable continuing, given the personal nature of this case? Yes, Your Honor, I said without hesitation. It is my duty as a law enforcement officer to uphold the law impartially, regardless of who is involved. I saw my mother flinch at that. My father looked away, his hand gripping the bench so tightly his knuckles were pale. Brian's eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and something like betrayal. But I held their gaze. For so long, my family had mistaken my silence for weakness, my independence for rebellion. They'd never understood the kind of strength it took to walk this path. Jessica continued, Can you describe the methods used to uncover the fraud? I kept my answers clinical. We reviewed financial records, traced email communications, conducted interviews with subcontractors, and coordinated with federal agencies. Surveillance footage, combined with digital forensic analysis, showed clear patterns of unauthorized data access. I paused, then added, O'Brien Parker had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. He used insider knowledge to bypass security protocols, and the money trail led directly to accounts associated with shell companies registered in his name. I could sense the gallery's reaction, a mixture of fascination and discomfort. No one wanted to see a family torn apart on the witness stand. But I owed it to myself, to the city, and even to Brian, to tell the truth. Jessica glanced at her notes, then asked quietly, How did you separate your professional responsibilities from your personal feelings? I let out a breath. It wasn't easy. But as police officers, we're trained to follow the evidence, not our emotions. I made sure every step was corroborated by independent sources. I recused myself from key decisions when there was a conflict of interest. Everything was double-checked by the district attorney's office and federal partners. Her next question was a difficult one. What impact has this investigation had on your relationship with your family? A silence fell over the room. I met the judge's eyes, then glanced at Brian. We haven't been close for a long time. My family and I grew apart when I chose this career. There was always pressure to live up to Brian's success. The investigation forced us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for years. Jessica's face softened. One last question, Sergeant Parker. In your professional opinion, does Brian Parker pose a flight risk? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The evidence shows he contacted international associates in Panama, Switzerland, and Singapore. He has access to substantial resources and was preparing to leave the country when he was arrested. A ripple went through the courtroom. I saw Brian's lawyer scribbling notes, my parents exchanging frightened whispers. The judge nodded, then leaned back in his chair. No further questions, Your Honor. Jessica sat, and Brian's defense attorney rose for cross-examination. He was careful, almost deferential. Sergeant Parker, is it true you and your brother haven't spoken in several years? That's correct. Isn't it possible your personal feelings have colored your judgment in this case? I gave him the same steady smile I'd used in countless interrogations. Personal feelings don't create bank records, encrypted messages, or wire transfers to offshore accounts. The evidence stands on its own. He pressed further. Is there any chance this investigation was motivated by jealousy or family rivalry? My lips curled in a cold, tired smile. If there was rivalry, it was never on my side. My only motivation is to see the truth come out, no matter who it implicates. He tried a few more lines of questioning, none of which gained traction. The judge soon cut him off. Thank you, Sergeant Parker. You may step down. I stood, steady on my feet, and walked back to my seat. As I passed my family, my mother's hand trembled as she reached for me, but I kept walking. It wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. Years of being sidelined, underestimated, and dismissed had taught me to protect myself. I wasn't their little girl anymore, and I wouldn't pretend otherwise. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal arguments and procedural motions. I listened as expert witnesses dissected financial records and IT logs. Every fact confirmed what I discovered. Brian was guilty, and my family's attempts to shield him, to rewrite the past, wouldn't change the truth. As court adjourned, I gathered my things, avoiding the stares of reporters outside the courthouse. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd just done, testifying against my own brother, exposing my family's secrets to the world. But I also felt something else. Relief. Maybe, for the first time, I was finally free from the shadow of the past. The courthouse emptied slowly, footsteps echoing off marble and glass as the crowd trickled out to the late afternoon streets. For a few minutes, I lingered in the corridor, staring at the courthouse seal embossed in the heavy doors, almost hypnotized by the way sunlight caught the gold leaf. I was trying to remember to breathe. Outside, the city throbbed with life. Car horns, distant sirens, tourists hustling past with cameras, not knowing or caring that someone's whole world had just shifted behind those doors. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through a half-dozen unread messages from my unit, and saw one from my old academy partner. He saw the news. Proud of you. Drinks tonight if you need. I smiled, grateful. The NYPD was the only family that had ever really understood me. But before I could respond, a shadow fell across my phone. My parents approached, hesitant, uncertain, looking like they might bolt at any moment. For the first time in years, I saw fear in my father's eyes, and something almost like regret in my mother's. Their voices were soft, careful, as if I might shatter. Ashley, a mom's voice trembled. Is it true? All of it? I looked at her, at both of them, and saw all the years we'd lost. All the birthdays, holidays, moments that could have been healing but were instead filled with silence or sharp words. Yes, I answered quietly, it's true. I did my job. I told the truth. Dad cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. We never realized you were involved in something this big. You never told us. I finally met his gaze. Did you ever ask? For 9 years, neither of you asked what I did for work or how my life was. You just assumed I was still the disappointment who didn't follow Brian's path. There was no bitterness in my voice, just exhaustion. I was done fighting for approval that was never coming. Mom reached out, as if to brush my hair from my face the way she did when I was small, but her hand hovered, then fell. If we'd known you were successful, if you were important. What? I interrupted, gentler than I expected. You'd have been proud? Loved me more? I shook my head. I didn't become successful to impress you. I did it for myself, maybe even in spite of you. There was a pause, heavy with the realization of everything unspoken between us. The illusion of family had finally cracked. For a long moment, none of us said anything. That's when Brian was led past us, hands cuffed in front, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Even now, I could see the old charm in his face, a hint of the kid I used to build forts with in Central Park, before life and family expectations took everything apart. His lawyer whispered urgently, but Brian stopped, turning to me. Ash, his voice was raw, all bravado gone. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. People did get hurt, Brian. Good people. People who trusted you. Cops, city workers, kids whose data is out there now, vulnerable. You didn't just hurt yourself, you hurt everyone who ever believed in you. His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, saying nothing more. The marshals led him away, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt tired. As the doors closed behind him, I turned back to my parents, who were struggling to process everything. Dad's voice was suddenly small, almost childlike. "We're sorry, Ash. We really are. We were wrong about you. About so much." I studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. An apology, a sign of understanding, maybe just love. But apologies offered under pressure, when the world is watching, don't change years of neglect. "I know you're sorry," I said quietly. But sorry doesn't erase 8 years of silence. Sorry doesn't erase 33 years of not being enough. My phone buzzed. Another text from the precinct. "We've got you covered. Don't worry about the press." A second message followed, this one from my lieutenant. "A great job today, Sergeant Parker. Proud to have you on our team. Briefing at HQ tomorrow morning." The world kept moving, regardless of the wreckage we leave behind. I realized, in that moment, that for all the pain and disappointment, I had built something for myself, a reputation, a purpose, a new family. Maybe not the one I was born into, but one that would never ask me to hide who I was. I took one last look at my parents. They seemed smaller now. Stripped of all their certainty. They built their world around Brian, and now that world was gone. Maybe, one day, they'd come to terms with who I really was, not the daughter they'd imagined, but the woman I had become. I stepped outside into the chaos of Manhattan. The sky was bright, the air humming with life. A taxi honked at a pedestrian, a street vendor laughed with a customer, and I felt, for the first time in years, the freedom to breathe. Tonight, I would let myself feel everything. The pain, the relief, the final, quiet triumph of being true to myself. The city lights were just flickering on as I stepped from the courthouse into the endless buzz of Manhattan. I paused on the wide steps, drawing a breath that felt heavier than any I'd taken in years. For a long time, I just stood there, letting the current of people flow around me. Nobody recognized me as the police officer who just testified against her brother, or as the disappointment of the Parker family. On the street, I was just another New Yorker, anonymous, invisible, free. I checked my phone, scrolling through a flurry of notifications, news alerts about the trial, emails from colleagues, and supportive texts from friends in the department. Most were simple. Proud of you. Tough day. Call me if you need to talk. The NYPD had always been a kind of chosen family for me, but I'd never felt it so keenly as now, standing alone outside the courthouse, having just detonated the myth of my family's perfect son. A cab pulled up to the curb, the driver raising his brows in silent question. I shook my head. I wasn't ready to go anywhere yet. Not home, not to the bar my friends had suggested, not even to the little diner I sometimes escaped to after a hard shift. I needed to walk, to let the sound and chaos of the city work through the adrenaline and exhaustion knotted in my chest. As I walked down Broadway, I replayed the day's events in my mind, seeing them not just as a cop but as a daughter, a sister. Had it always been inevitable, this rupture between us? Even as a kid, I'd sensed a gulf growing between what my family wanted and who I was becoming. The Parkers had built their identity around Brian's success and around a vision of family that left no room for anything unexpected, least of all a daughter who found fulfillment in a badge instead of a briefcase. I turned onto a quieter street, passing small businesses just closing up, parents wrangling tired children, delivery guys racing against the last orders. It all felt so ordinary, so distant from the tension and drama of the courtroom. I found myself longing for that kind of ordinary. The freedom not to always prove myself, not to be the cautionary tale, not to carry the invisible weight of family expectations. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But when I saw the name, Meyer Jenkins, my partner in the department, I smiled despite myself. Ash! I watched the live stream. You killed it, Meyer said, voice warm and teasing. You holding up? I found a stoop and sat, letting the exhaustion settle. I don't know what I'm feeling. Relief? Sadness? Both, I guess. Maybe just tired. You did the right thing, Meyer said gently. You always do. Her confidence in me was unwavering, a gift I'd never learned to give myself. I keep wondering if I could have changed something, years ago. Been a better sister, or more patient daughter. There was a pause, then Meyer's voice, firm as ever. Ashley, you spent your whole life trying to make everyone else happy. At some point, you have to let go of who they wanted you to be and just be who you are. I closed my eyes, letting her words settle. Yeah. I think I finally did that today. But it hurts more than I thought it would. That's what happens when you stop pretending, Meyer replied. But trust me, you're going to feel lighter every day from here on out. Want me to bring takeout and a bad movie to your place? A small, genuine laugh escaped me. Not tonight. I think I need to be alone, just for a little while. But thanks. She understood. She always did. After I hung up, I stared out at the street for a long time, thinking about the meaning of family. Of loyalty, of truth. Maybe I'd never have the kind of family dinners I saw in movies. Maybe holidays would always be awkward. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like the beginning of something new. As the sky deepened to purple, I finally rose and headed for home. My apartment was small, but every piece of it was mine, chosen, earned, lived in. The photos on the walls weren't of childhood birthdays or family vacations, but snapshots with colleagues, medals from charity runs, handwritten notes from grateful victims or community leaders. The life I'd built was messy and imperfect, but it was real. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and let myself stand in the middle of my living room, just breathing. I thought about Brian, about my parents, about how the truth, once spoken, can never be taken back, about the cost of honesty and the strange, quiet freedom it brings. My phone buzzed one last time, an email from the department, a briefing at 8 a.m. Coffee's on us. It made me smile. Tomorrow would bring another day, another case, another opportunity to do the work that mattered to me. For now, though, I allowed myself the rare luxury of peace. I turned off the lights, opened a window to the summer air, and let the city's sounds lull me to sleep. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about being left behind. Instead, I dreamed of running, not away from my past, but forward, into a future I could finally claim as my own. The next morning, the world looked almost unchanged. Manhattan streets still roared with cabs and morning runners, coffee carts steamed in the sunrise, and the hum of the city pressed in at every intersection. But inside, everything felt different. As I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, tying my hair back into a precise ponytail, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. There were shadows beneath my eyes, yes, but something else too, a steadiness that came from surviving the storm. I pinned on my NYPD badge, as I had for almost a decade, but for the first time, I allowed myself a small smile of pride. I'd always worn it with a sense of purpose, but now there was something new, a sense of ownership, maybe, or relief. No more pretending. No more shrinking to fit the Parker family narrative. Just me, Sergeant Ashley Parker, with all my scars and all my strength. My commute took me through Central Park, and I let myself slow down, savoring the cool morning air. The city was full of reminders, kids racing to school, joggers lost in their playlists, tourists snapping photos. It made me think about Brian and me as children, when life was simpler and the world hadn't yet pressed us into competing roles. Before expectations hardened into walls. For a moment, a lump rose in my throat. Then I let it go. I'd spent too many years grieving the family I'd wanted, instead of accepting the one I had. At precinct headquarters, I was greeted by the usual flurry of noise, radios crackling, boots on tile, the scent of strong coffee wafting down the hallway. But there was something different in the way my colleagues looked at me. Nods of respect, quick smiles, nothing dramatic, just a recognition that came from knowing someone had faced the fire and come through standing. My lieutenant waved me over. "Parker, good to see you back." He slid a cup of coffee my way, then lowered his voice. "Heard about the case. You handled yourself well. Proud of you." "Thank you, sir," I said. And I meant it. He didn't ask about my family, or the headlines, or the pain behind the case. He just handed me the day's assignments and treated me like the cop I was. My partner, Meyer, was waiting by my desk, her ever-present grin in place. "You made the news, Ash. Full hero status. Can I get your autograph?" I rolled my eyes but smiled. "Only if you promise not to sell it on eBay." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Seriously, you okay?" For a second, I hesitated, but then I nodded. "I think I am." It wasn't easy, but it was right. And I'm ready to get back to work. She nudged me with her shoulder. "Good. Because we've got a string of burglaries in Midtown, and the coffee is only going to last so long." We laughed. And just like that, life began to feel normal again. The rhythm of the day, reports, briefings, suspects to interview, gave me purpose. In the work, there was no space for old wounds to fester. Still, between calls and paperwork, my mind drifted to my parents. I wondered what they were doing now, if they were reading the news, fielding calls from neighbors, trying to figure out how to move forward with one child in jail and another who'd finally stepped out of the shadows. Part of me ached for them. Part of me didn't care. It was a strange, bittersweet freedom. That evening, as the sky turned orange over the city, Meyer and I walked out together. The streets buzzed with the end-of-day rush, horns and laughter and the scent of street food filling the air. "Drinks?" She asked, hope in her voice. "Rain check," I said. "I think I need a quiet night." She squeezed my arm. "Anytime, Ash. I'm proud of you, you know. For all of it." I watched her disappear into the crowd and headed home, feeling the familiar ache of tired muscles and the rare, warm glow of belonging. My phone buzzed, a message from my father, simple and hesitant. We're thinking of you. Call when you can. For a while, I just stared at it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe soon. Back in my apartment, I opened a window, letting the city sounds drift in. I changed into sweatpants, poured a cup of tea, and stood for a long time by the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. New York was relentless and noisy and beautiful, so much like the life I'd built for myself. Messy, imperfect, but entirely my own. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I found myself not replaying the trial or my parents' faces, but thinking about the cases waiting on my desk. About the small victories, the family reunited, the con artist behind bars, the stolen goods returned. Work didn't heal everything, but it grounded me. It gave me purpose. For the first time in years, I woke before my alarm, clear-headed and ready to face the day. The Parker family story was still a wound, but it was finally starting to heal. There would be scars, I knew, but scars are just another word for survival. And in the soft blue of morning, with the city waiting outside my window, I realized I was finally, truly free. A week passed before the next summons arrived, this time, not from the courts, but from the federal detention center where Brian was being held pending trial. I got the message mid-shift, sandwiched between reviewing surveillance footage and returning a call from a local prosecutor. My first instinct was to ignore it. I'd said everything I needed to say on the witness stand. But some part of me, the part that still remembered childhood summers and shared secrets, knew I had to go. The center was just across the East River, a cold and impersonal building, all concrete and fluorescent lights. The check-in process was clinical. Badge, ID, sign here. A guard led me down a long hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and nerves. As we walked, I rehearsed what I might say, but the words slipped away, replaced by the hollow ache of everything that had been lost. Brian waited for me in a glass-walled visiting room, wearing a jumpsuit that looked far too big for him. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders rounded, face drawn, eyes less certain. He managed a tired smile when I sat down on the other side of the barrier. "Ash," he said, voice rough. "Thanks for coming." I studied him for a long moment, remembering the years when he'd been the unstoppable one, the golden child. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I know," he replied. "You probably shouldn't have." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with all the things we couldn't say. "I wish it didn't end up like this," he finally said, gaze fixed on the table. "I never wanted to hurt you. Or Mom. Or Dad." My hands were steady, but my heart twisted. "But you did, Brian. And not just us. There are people out there who trusted you, who are still trying to fix the mess you made." He nodded, swallowing hard. I kept telling myself I'd make it right. That one big deal would fix everything, and no one would know. "That's not how life works," I said softly. "You can't undo the damage by pretending it never happened." He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw my brother, not the entrepreneur or the prodigy, but the boy who'd shared ice cream with me on sticky summer nights. "I was always so afraid of failing them," he whispered. I couldn't stand the idea that I'd just be ordinary. There it was, the old wound. "We all felt that pressure," I said. "But you didn't have to carry it alone." He laughed bitterly. "You say that, but you're the strong one now. The hero. I was supposed to be the one everyone looked up to." I met his gaze, the words coming easier now. Maybe we both spent too long living for what they wanted. I just chose a different kind of rebellion. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry for how I treated you. For not standing up for you when you joined the force. For letting them talk about you like you were less. I took a deep breath, feeling some of the old anger slip away. I don't need your apology to move forward. But I appreciate hearing it. A guard tapped the glass. Time was almost up. Brian shifted, voice unsteady. What happens now? I straightened. That's up to you. You take responsibility. You accept what comes next. And maybe, when you get out, you find a way to make things right, not for them, but for yourself. He nodded, eyes shining. Will you ever forgive me? I hesitated. Maybe. One day. But I'm done living in the past, Brian. I hope you can be, too. The guard opened the door, signaling the end of our visit. I stood and hesitated before leaving. Take care of yourself, Brian. He managed a real smile then, small but genuine. You, too, Ash. As I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt strangely lighter. Maybe forgiveness didn't come all at once. Maybe it wasn't something you gave for their sake, but for your own. For the first time, I understood that I could let go, not to erase the past, but to stop letting it define me. Back in the city, I walked without direction, letting my mind drift. I thought about my parents, about whether they would ever understand, truly, what had happened. I knew things would never return to what they were, and that was okay. I didn't need their recognition, or Brian's. My life was mine to build. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find a letter slipped under my door. It was from my mother, the handwriting uncertain and rushed. I poured a cup of tea before opening it. Ashley, I don't know what to say, except that we're sorry. Your father and I are trying to understand everything, but mostly, we're just sad. I know we didn't make it easy for you to be yourself, and that's our fault, not yours. You did what was right. We hope you'll call when you're ready. Love, Mom. I read the letter twice, heart twisting with old wounds and new possibilities. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I didn't call right away. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be, not in the way they hoped. But as I stood at my window, watching the city sparkle against the night, I felt a sense of quiet peace settle over me. My family might never be what I dreamed, but I was free to live my own truth. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work, another shift, another case, another chance to help someone else find justice. And maybe, someday, I'd find my way back to them. But for now, I was enough. It was a strange thing, living in the aftermath. The newspapers eventually lost interest, and the headlines moved on to fresher scandals. My parents retreated into a wary silence, unsure how to bridge the years between us. Brian's case wound its way through the courts. Lawyers called me for clarifications, but I spoke only what I'd already shared on the stand. The days turned cooler, September sliding into October, and the city's energy changed, crisper, more urgent, as if everyone was hurrying towards something new. For me, that is something new it was ordinary life. It felt almost revolutionary, this quiet routine, waking up early, running the loop in Central Park, buying coffee from the cart on the corner where the owner now greeted me by name. The city that had always felt indifferent was now layered with small comforts, each day a little lighter than the last. Work at the precinct settled back into its old, steady rhythms. My desk filled with new case files, identity theft, small business fraud, the endless tangle of urban crime. Meyer and I were a seamless team, our banter quick and warm, each inside joke a stitch in the quilt of camaraderie we'd built. She never pushed when I was quiet, but she noticed when I needed a laugh or a night out. "You're not the only one with baggage, Ash," as she'd say, rolling her eyes. "Let's carry it together." One evening after shift, we went to a little diner off 9th Avenue. The place was all Formica tables and fluorescent lights, with a jukebox in the corner playing Springsteen on a loop. Meyer slid into the booth, ordered 2 burgers and fries before I even opened the menu. "You've been different lately," as she said, chin propped on her hands. "Not bad different. Just lighter." I shrugged, tracing the condensation on my water glass. I think I finally stopped trying to fix something that was never really mine to fix. My family. My brother. All of it. Meyer grinned. "Welcome to adulthood. Nobody tells you how good it feels to finally put down everyone else's expectations." I laughed, surprising myself. "Guess I'm late to the party." "Hey," as she nudged my foot under the table, "the party's just getting started. Trust me." Later, walking home alone, I replayed her words. For so long, I'd measured myself by the old scale. Was I enough for them? Was I doing the right thing? Now, those questions felt less important. I was learning to measure myself by my own standards, by the people I helped, the cases I solved, the life I chose, day after day. On weekends, I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching self-defense classes for women and teens. At first, I worried about running into people who recognized my name from the news. But it turned out nobody cared about the Parker scandal. They cared about learning to feel safe, to throw a punch, to find their voice. In that mirrored gym, watching a nervous girl's eyes light up as she landed her first solid jab, I found a piece of myself I thought I'd lost, a sense of power, not just for myself, but to give away. Sometimes I get texts from my mother. Usually short, sometimes awkward, "Saw a picture of you at the community center. Proud of you." Or, "Your father's birthday is next week. Maybe dinner?" No pressure. I took my time answering. Sometimes I didn't answer at all. But the wall was softer now, not the barricade it once was. Maybe, over time, we could find a new way to be a family, not built on expectations or shared successes, but on honesty and acceptance. One Friday, after wrapping up a long shift, I walked out into the city dusk and felt the first real chill of autumn. I paused on the steps of the precinct, breathing in the sharp, clean air. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was excited for what might come next. Back at my apartment, I opened a package that had arrived that morning, a photo frame, sent by Meyer, with a picture of us after a charity race, medals around our necks, sweat-streaked and grinning. On the back she'd written, "Your real family is the one you choose." It made me laugh, and then, unexpectedly, it made me cry. I set the frame on my windowsill, where the morning light would catch it every day. The next morning, I woke before dawn, feeling rested. I pulled on old sweats and sneakers, and for the first time in ages, I ran simply because I wanted to. No ghosts chasing me, no voices in my head demanding more. Just me, the city, and the rhythm of my own breath. As the sun came up over Manhattan, painting the skyline gold, I stopped at the highest point in the park and looked out over the city. My city. My home. I took a deep breath and smiled. I wasn't running away anymore. I was running toward something, toward myself, toward a future I was finally ready to claim. And in that quiet, perfect moment, I knew I was whole. Autumn settled into the city with a painter's hand, flames of red and gold in Central Park, a briskness in the air that sharpened every sound. For once, I wasn't dreading the coming holidays. The old ache, that knot of resentment and longing, had faded. In its place was a kind of acceptance, a gentle curiosity about what life could be, unshaped by anyone else's definition of success. The weeks passed. Brian's sentencing made the local news, but it was no longer front-page material. He got 12 years with parole for cooperation, and a short note from him arrived a week later. Trying to do better, Ash. Thank you for being honest, even when it hurt. I hope someday you'll visit. I'm proud of you. I set the letter in a drawer, unsure if or when I'd write back, but I felt a strange comfort in those simple words. Maybe that was all we'd ever have, and maybe that was enough. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself walking uptown, drawn by old habit to the Parker family apartment. I didn't announce my visit, just rang the bell and waited, bracing for nerves that never quite came. My mother opened the door, surprise flickering into relief. Ashley, as she breathed, stepping aside to let me in. The place was the same faded sofa, same family photos along the hallway, Brian's high school trophies still dusted on the shelf. But the air was different, softer somehow, as if the old arguments had finally drained away. My father stood when I entered the living room. For a moment, we all hovered in the awkward space between apology and forgiveness. Mom broke the silence, her voice trembling but clear. Would you like some tea? It was her way of reaching across the divide. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising between us. Conversation started stilted. Weather, work, news about distant relatives. But slowly, something shifted. They asked about my cases, and listened, really listened, as I told stories of lives changed and hard days made better by small wins. My mother reached out once, covering my hand with hers. We're so proud of you, Ashley. We didn't know how to show it. I nodded, swallowing the old lump in my throat. You don't have to say the right thing. Just be here. That's enough. My father's voice, roughened by years of holding back, broke through. I'm sorry for making you feel less. That was never what I wanted. I wish I'd seen you for who you are, not who I thought you should be. The tears came then, quiet, honest, not the storm of old fights but the gentle rain of letting go. In that moment, forgiveness felt like something that didn't have to be said aloud. It was simply there, filling the spaces where hurt had lived for so long. We talked for hours, sometimes circling old ground but never falling into old patterns. When I finally stood to leave, Mom hugged me tightly, her chin on my shoulder like when I was a child. Don't be a stranger, honey. We love you. Walking home, I realized I was finally ready to let the past rest, not erase it, but accept it as part of my story. The sun set behind the skyline, casting everything in gold, and for the first time I felt peace. Not the brittle peace of pretending, but the kind that comes from truly being seen. That week at work, everything felt lighter. Meyer noticed first, of course. You've got that post-family dinner glow, as she teased. Don't tell me you actually made up. I grinned. Something like that. Or maybe I just stopped running from myself. She winked. Told you. The party's just getting started. The precinct hummed with cases and chaos, new scams, old suspects, victories big and small. But my mind kept returning to the little moments, a kid high-fiving me after a safety torque, a thank you note from a shopkeeper, Myers' laughter echoing through the squad room. This was the family I'd built, messy, fiercely loyal, a little broken, but real. Months later, on a chilly winter morning, I stood on the steps of City Hall to receive a commendation for my work on the Parker case. The mayor read my name, cameras flashed, and for a second, I remembered the old ache to be recognized. But as applause echoed across the plaza, I realized I didn't need the city's approval, or even my family's. I'd earned my place, on my terms. After the ceremony, I stood by the fountain, watching the light shimmer on the water. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, "We love you," and for once, I believed it, not because she said it, but because I finally loved myself. As I headed home, phone buzzing with congratulations from colleagues and friends, I caught my reflection in a shop window. Gone was the girl desperate for approval, haunted by the word disappointment. In her place was a woman, strong, scarred, whole. Someone who had faced the worst and found, in the end, that the only person she truly needed to be proud of her was herself. Back in my apartment, I hung the commendation on the wall, right next to the photo of Meyer and me at the finish line, and my mother's first clumsy text, "Proud of you always." The city spread out below my window, endless and full of possibility. I knew there would be more hard days, more disappointments, more moments when I doubted my place in the world. But as I watched the lights flicker on, one by one, I understood something that had taken a lifetime to learn. I was home. I was loved. And for the first time, that was enough.